The war between Ukraine and Russia is starting to unravel. Since the beginning of this month, Ukrainian forces have managed to penetrate the southern defenses of the Russian army, using only a few brigades and long-range missiles. This was a small-scale attack, not all out. However, it was enough to disrupt the entire order of the invading Russian army in Ukraine. In this offensive, Ukrainian forces used Storm Shadow ballistic missiles, tactical UAVs, and partisans as a lead force, especially in Russian cities on the Black Sea and as off-sea coasts and on the Ukrainian border. Russian military assets and critical logistics lines were successfully destroyed by missiles and partisan operations. As it is known, cutting the enemy's logistics is a classic strategy. Attacks on logistics lines cripples armies. This is how Ukraine managed to cripple the Russian army with its long-range missile attacks and partisan operations. The targets of these attacks were Russian railways and ammunition depots. The Russian army in Melitopol, Mariupol, Berdyansk, and Crimea went completely on the defensive but were unable to stop neither the Ukrainian missiles nor the partisans. The partisans responsible for many explosions and assassinations have continued to attack Russian supply lines in Crimea since the start of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. The other day, Ukrainian partisans blew up another railway in Crimea. According to preliminary information, the explosion occurred last night in a section of the railway near Feodosia. As a result of the explosion, the Russian supply train passing there blew up with the ammunition inside. A large crater was opened in the railway bed. The Kremlin-appointed head of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, confirmed the rail attack near Feodosia and the destruction of the Russian supply train. According to Aksyonov, about 20 of the Russian soldiers on the train lost their lives. Most of the rest were taken to hospitals in Crimea with serious injuries. Aksyonov also stated that there was a very serious damage to the railway and services would be interrupted for 1 month and buses would be removed for passengers from Feodosia and Vladislavovka stations. The Russian Defense Ministry did not comment on the matter. The Ukrainian Chief of Staff reported that the attack was carried out by Ukrainian partisans and that the supply train contained a large amount of artillery and Kalashnikov shells. He reported that all these ammunition became unusable and 25 Russian soldiers died according to initial determinations. Ukraine's Chief of General Staff also praised the partisans who carried out the attack and stated that they would work to give them all medals of honor at the end of the war. The offensive actions of the Ukrainian partisan groups greatly influenced the course of the Ukrainian war. The actions carried out both in Ukraine and in the mainland of Russia made a lot of noise. These actions appeared not only as bomb attacks against Russian elements, but also as assassinations from time to time. Earlier this week, partisans blew up the railway bridge near the occupied Melitopol. Russian troops used the bridge in the town of Yakimivka to supply weapons from the Crimea. It was noted that the bridge serves as part of the arms supply artery from the Crimea to the Zaporizhia region. Exiled Mayor Ivan Fedorov said that the explosion blocked an important Russian logistics route near occupied Melitopol in Zaporizhia Oblast. According to Ivan Fedorov, Russian forces lost 5 freight cars and a 50-meter railway line as a result of the explosions. Fedorov reported that the explosion occurred at the most opportune moment when a train carrying stolen ore was on the track. Also in May, a freight train derailed in the Bryansk region as a result of the explosion. A locomotive and about 20 wagons were derailed. Earlier, a Russian freight train from Belarus was attacked as it passed through the Bryansk region. About 96 kilometers east of the Ukrainian border, 8 of the train's 78 wagons were derailed. As can be seen, explosions occur regularly in the occupied territories, while local Ukrainian partisan movements target Russian authorities, collaborators, and Russian military equipment. While Moscow generally blames Ukraine for such incidents, Kiev does not take responsibility for the explosions. Since the beginning of the Ukrainian war, partisans have eliminated exactly 50 senior Russian military officials appointed by the Kremlin. Apart from these oil and gas facilities, government buildings and factories in Russia were blown up by Ukrainian partisan groups. These attacks inflicted great losses on when the Kremlin, both economically and politically worn out, did its best to silence the partisan groups but failed. However, the actions of the partisans that made the most noise and affected the course of the war took place with the actions against the Russian supply routes. While in some of these actions, the partisans were directly involved, they sometimes coordinated the army and helped the army get the job done. With the partisans blowing up the Russian supply routes, the Russian defense, especially in the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, has weakened considerably. Looking at the course of the counterattack, the fact that Ukraine has gained the most in these regions is the biggest proof of the dire situation of the Russian army. In addition, in the past days, while the Russian army was unloading ammunition that came to them, the military train that brought the ammunition was attacked by the Ukrainian armed forces. The attack took place in Rakov, which is located in the Kherson region and is under Russian control. Regional officials appointed by Russia reported that early last day strong explosions occurred in the Russian-controlled settlement of Rakov in the Kherson region, and then a train carrying ammunition belonging to the Russian army was hit. Civilians in the region posted many videos of the explosion on social media. The explosion information was also confirmed by Petro Andriushenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol. The attack on the Russian military installation took place around 4 a.m., Andriushenko said. They are on their way to the Granile area. Judging by the reports from the local population, there was a large arsenal of ammunition belonging to our army there. The explosion started right there. Local people said that they heard the sounds of the clashes a few hours after the explosions. The Ukrainian General Staff Bank also announced that a train belonging to the Russian army was attacked during the unloading of ammunition at the partisan station. The Chief of General Staff said in a statement that a large number of dead were among the Russian troops loading. Rakov is about 120 kilometers from the areas controlled by the Ukrainian army. Therefore, it can be assumed that the Ukrainians used Storm Shadow missiles to hit the Russian military installation. Ukraine's Chief of Staff has yet to provide an update on how the attack took place. So what is the situation elsewhere? The attacks of the Ukrainian army on the Russian-controlled side of Kherson did not end there. In the past day, powerful explosions were heard in several settlements temporarily under Russian control of the Kherson region on the coast of the Black and Azov Seas. Ukrainian military officials reported explosions at warehouses and bases of Russian troops. Loud explosions were heard in the Russian-controlled city of Henichesk in the Kherson region. According to eyewitnesses, the explosion occurred in the Russian army's ammunition depot in the suburbs. Russian social media users made comments on the issue by posting images from the region. The information was confirmed by Petro Andriushenko, an advisor to the mayor of Mariupol appointed by the Kremlin. A Russian ammunition depot near Henichesk was hit by Ukrainian missile and artillery units. According to local residents, there was a large ammunition depot belonging to the Russian army in the area. The attack, which started with the attacks of the Ukrainian army against the warehouse in Rakov, resulted in the complete destruction of the ammunition warehouse and the death or injury of many Russian soldiers. Sergei Chernenko, a pro-Ukrainian activist in the region, noted that the attack was a direct hit. The explosions lasted for several hours and could be heard from far away. Later, explosions were reported in Skadovsk and at Russian bases in the Kherson region, also in the urban-type settlement of the Kherson region. Henichesk region, Rakov on the territory of the grain elevator. There have been explosions for several hours and smoke rises into the air. According to preliminary data, a hit was recorded in a large warehouse with ammunition. The Southern Operations Center of Ukraine reported that the explosions in Henichesk were very intense. These explosions lasted for 2 hours but occurred well beyond residential areas. After the blast ceased, clashes broke out between Russian troops and Ukrainian forces. Ukraine's Southern Operations Center reported that 150 Russian soldiers were killed or injured as a result of this conflict. Under the attacks of the Ukrainian army, especially on the southern front, there is a dream to take Crimea out of Russian control and turn the historical peninsula back into Ukrainian territory. Given the current progress of the Ukrainian army in the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, it would not be wrong to say that this will be possible in the near future. Kherson and Zaporizhia regions are seen as land bridges, connecting Crimea and Ukraine in particular. The city of Mariupol will provide the Ukrainian army with necessary geographical advantage to recapture the Crimea. With the Ukrainian army breaking through the Russian defense lines, it's very close to Mariupol and should not be surprising that it liberated this place soon. In this way, Ukraine will be able to get the victory it expects as soon as possible and perhaps put an end to this fierce war. The intensity of the clashes in the Russia-Ukraine war is increasing day by day. While the Ukrainian army is preparing for a counteroffensive, the Russian army has taken a position in many regions. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has encountered many developments that he had not thought of before in the process of invading Ukraine. These developments have cornered the invaders and strengthened the Ukrainian army. The war is not going well for Russia. The Ukrainian army, strengthened with military aid of Western and European countries, is cornering the Russian army with its successful attacks against the invaders. Putin's army, which cannot find soldiers to take part in the plan to invade Ukraine, is losing its ammunition as a result of the attacks of the Ukrainian army. The Russian army is getting exhausted every day. The Ukrainian army, which has been preparing for the spring offensive for some time, continues to target Russian invaders, even though it has not yet started to attack. It is preparing for. In fact, the attacks carried out by the Ukrainian army in recent days give clues about the size of the spring offensive. In recent days, the Ukrainian army has carried out successful operations targeting Russian invaders and their equipment. Dozens of invading troops in different regions were hit on the same day, while 7 drones belonging to the invaders were shot down. The Ukrainian army also shared images of the destroyed BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicle of the Russian invaders. The missile attack of the Russian army were shot down by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. As Anchor Daily News team, we continued to convey the developments in the Russia-Ukraine war. Our team, which makes an effort to keep up with all the developments in the war, which has recently increased its intensity, works with the understanding of accurate and impartial journalism. You can click the Super Thanks button below to support our team. Let's analyze the latest developments on the front line together. Over the past day, the Ukrainian army has launched 4 attacks on the areas where the Russian occupation troops are located. These attacks added the Russian invaders' losses in the war. Rocket and artillery units of the Ukrainian army targeted points that are very important for the Russian occupiers. As a result of this attack, the invaders suffered great losses. Rocket and artillery units hit a Russian unit, 2 checkpoints, an ammunition depot, and an air defense system. The loss of an army's ammunition depot and air defense systems is a big problem, so much so that the increase in these losses can have enough impact to change the course of the war. Because an army losing its ammunition depot is like a person having a food and drink problem. The most important need for success in war is undoubtedly ammunition. Lack of weapons, explosives, and other equipment means that armies are cornered. The Russian army, which is losing more and more ammunition depots every day as a result of successful attacks by the Ukrainian army, continues to be cornered by the question of equipment and ammunition. One of the important pieces of equipment lost by the Russian army in the attack organized by the Ukrainian army the other day is the air defense systems. These systems are indispensable in contemporary wars because today air attacks are more effective than land and sea attacks. The impact of an army unit consisting of dozens of soldiers is less than the impact of a missile launched at the enemy. Although the Russian army is aware of this important comparison, it is unable to protect its air defense systems. the equipment pursued by the Ukrainian army from Western and European countries is capable of destroying the air defense systems of the Russian invaders. In contrast to the inadequate and depleting air defense systems of the Russian army, the air defense systems of the Ukrainian army are accomplishing successful works. The past 21 of the 23 Russian RD-101 Kh-555 cruise missiles launched by the Russian invaders were shot down by Ukrainian air defenses items. Valery Zaluzhny, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, announced that Russian Tu-95 aircraft launched missiles at Ukrainian troops over the Caspian Sea around 4 a.m. at night. In a statement on a Telegram account, Zaluzhny also said 21 of 23 101 Kh-555 cruise missiles and 2 UAVs of operational tactical level were destroyed by anti-aircraft missile units in cooperation with the air defense systems of the Ukrainian Air Force. It is now difficult to report on successful attacks by Ukrainian army because the number of attacks by the Ukrainian army is increasing every day. Russian invaders may soon be incapacitated in the face of these attacks. The other day, the Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine made a post on its Telegram account. This post was photos of the destroyed BMP-2 tanks of the Russian invaders. The Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said the following in a post on its Telegram account. Russian invaders do not stop trying to break through our defense lines in Luhansk region. Every day, soldiers of the 25th Separate Chas-Live Airborne Brigade of the Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine repel enemy attacks, confidently turning enemy combat vehicles along with their infamous owners into scrap battle. The losses of the Russian army cannot be expressed in a report. Even the losses suffered in 1-2 days caused pages of reports. Apart from the 7 drones shot down by the Ukrainian army, the Zala 421 drone shot down by the Ukrainian army in the Kherson region is of great importance. The use of this drone was described in a Telegram post shared by the Ukrainian National Guard as follows. Russian troops often use this device for reconnaissance, control of territory, search and destruction of targets, monitoring the movement of military equipment. As the Ukrainian army prepares for a comprehensive spring offensive, the Russian army's losses are mounting. The spring offensive has been on the agenda for a long time. That's why many Ukrainians, even those who have never been on the front line, want to take part in it. A new statement on the spring offensive came from Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov at a press conference in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. Reznikov said that the Ukrainian army is preparing for the offensive with all its teams and that this preparation will be completed very soon. Reznikov said the preparations are coming to an end, as in addition to weapons and military equipment, there must be training for our military personnel and how to use them. We have received state-of-the-art systems. It is only a matter of time before the Ukrainian army launches its spring offensive with this offensive. The Ukrainian army aims to retake all the territories captured by the Russian invaders. The losses of the Russian army, which took a defensive position and dug trenches in response to the spring offensive, started to increase even before the offensive started. The Russian army has suffered serious losses since the day the war started, and these losses continue to increase. The losses of the Russian army since the beginning of the occupation are as follows: 189,460 military personnel, 3,694 tanks, 70,181 armored combat vehicles, 2,905 artillery systems, 543 reactive spread fire systems, 294 air defense systems, 308 aircraft, 294 helicopters, 5,819 automotive and tank equipment, 18 military ships and boats, 911 cruise missiles, 2,467 unmanned aerial vehicles, 353 special machines for operational tactical missile systems. With these losses, it is estimated that Russian leader Vladimir Putin will not be able to put up much resistance against the Ukrainian army. What are your thoughts? Can the Russian army recover its losses? Will the Ukrainian army's spring offensive affect the course of the war? The war between Ukraine and Russia is escalating rapidly. The Ukrainian armed forces remained in safe positions, preventing Soledar from being completely occupied. At the same time, the Ukrainian army increased the strength of its offensive in Bakhmut and Crimea land. Russian forces claimed to have captured Soledar, a small salt mining town a few miles north of Bakhmut. The Russian offensive, led by the notorious Wagner Group private military company, repulsed the Ukrainian defenders. But the town was still controversial. Russian forces are paying for their small advances with extremely heavy losses. Russian forces lose an average of 500 soldiers every day beyond the obvious first-generation problem posed by this high casualty rate. It also demoralizes the Russians. The most striking example of this high casualty pattern was experienced in the Soledar region the other day. The fight for Soledar as well as Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine has turned into some of the most violent clashes of the war ever. In fact, Andriy Yermak, head of the presidency of Ukraine, refers to the longest and most combat in the First World War and states that Soledar is the Verdun of the 21st century. In Ukraine, the most fierce battle on the front line of the war is currently sold out. Today, Ukraine wiped out the entire Russian military unit in Soledar with a single HIMARS attack. The HIMARS attack, in which the Ukrainian armed forces targeted the Russian Wagner camp, took place amid conflicting reports about Soledar's fate. After following a unit of troops to a house in Soledar, Ukraine removed about 25 soldiers of the Russian platoon in a single attack. The small salt mining town has witnessed some of the war's fiercest skirmishes for months. Footage of the attack raises questions about Russian tactics after soldiers were easily pursued by Ukrainian forces. In the video footage shared on social media platforms, it can be clearly seen that Russian forces are walking on a train track in the snow-covered terrain. The armed unit was then traced to a building that the Russians used as a shelter. Ukrainian forces blew up the house with a HIMARS missile. With the accurate shot of the HIMARS missile, the Russian shelter was blown up. As huge smoke rises to the Ukrainian skies, we see that the entire building is wiped off the face of the earth with a single blow. In this operation, we see the success of the drone operators of the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine has succeeded in changing all the doctrines in the modern world, front and street wars, and even in naval warfare. Offensive reconnaissance, kamikaze, and lightly armed bomb-laden drones so skillfully used by the Ukrainian army are the key guerrilla tactic that changed the course of the war. We see how effective and vital they are, especially when combined with very destructive weapons like HIMARS. In recent weeks, Ukrainian drones have started to come to the fore even more. It has now been proven that the war technologies of the future will definitely be on unmanned aerial vehicles. We frequently witness that Russia, which we thought had the second largest army in the world before the Ukraine war, was destroyed by the Kiev military units. Even a single HIMARS has the potential to cause serious losses to Russia. The supply of longer-range firing systems and precision-guided artillery shells to Kiev by the United States and other NATO countries was an important step that put Ukraine ahead of Russia. These systems have proven to be both highly effective and sustainable, as the Current Affairs YouTube channel. All of our findings are created by the work and analysis of our field warfare expert team and are based on data from the US, UK, Russia, and Ukraine, Ministry of Defense, and independent war analysis and monitoring sources. After the Soledar attacks, heavy fighting broke out in the suburbs of Bakhmut in the settlement of Kaliska, located a few kilometers from Bakhmut. Fierce clashes took place between the Ukrainian army and units of the Wagner PMC. The Klutchivka enclave is a key settlement that provides an opportunity for the tactical encirclement of Bakhmut. In the video footage shot by Ukrainian soldiers, we noticed that the armed forces of Ukraine are actively using armored vehicles and firing quite heavily from various types of weapons. Also, judging by the use of handheld anti-tank grenade launchers, combat engagements are conducted at a relatively short distance. It is difficult to pinpoint exactly where such video footage was shot in the Crimea region, but we think that the Ukrainian troops are outside the fortifications. There is also the possibility that the video footage will show an attempt to counterattack in this direction to push the front line of Ukrainian troops eastward. After losing control over Soledar, the Ukrainian armed forces shifted about 3,000 troops to the Bakhmut area, thereby significantly strengthening the city's defenses. We see that the Moscow army has experienced a serious decrease in ammunition reserves due to the long-term and still continuing war in Ukraine. It is clear that Russia is using the S-300 and S-400 air defense systems to hit ground targets, and Moscow's ballistic missile stocks are declining. Ukrainian intelligence claims that Russia has less than 100 modern Iskander ballistic munitions left. At the same time, Ukrainian intelligence states that Russia instead uses the S-300 and S-400 systems due to the abundance of ammunition. Declining stockpiles of weapons could become key issues for both sides in a war that has lasted almost 11 months and looks set to continue as the war drags on. Ukraine presses its Western supporters to supply its forces with tanks, particularly the German-designed Leopard model. Britain has promised Ukraine 14 Challenger 2 tanks this weekend, making it the first Western country to supply the heavy tanks Kiev demands. Peskov predicted that they would have little influence in Ukraine's war effort. The Polish Prime Minister recently urged the German government to supply Kiev with a wide range of weapons and express hope that Berlin would soon approve the transfer of battle tanks in the 47th week of the brutal war initiated by Vladimir Putin. The Russian army continues to kill Ukrainian civilians. Over the weekend, the Russian army launched a new wave of missiles against Ukraine. The last missile attack targeted civilian targets in Dnipro. A Russian missile struck a large 9-story residential building, killing at least 30 people and injuring many more. The Ukrainian Air Force claims that the Russian army hit the building with Kh-22 Kitchen anti-ship missile. Kiev blamed Moscow for the attack, but the Kremlin declared that Russian forces were not responsible. The Kremlin cited an unsubstantiated theory circulating on social media that the Ukrainian air defense systems were causing the damage. But as the Ukrainian war drags on and Russian strategy continues to rely heavily on missile attacks on Ukraine's critical infrastructure and urban centers, the Russian arsenal is likely to be quickly depleted. Since October, Russia has launched more than 1,100 ballistic and cruise missiles at Ukraine. Although the Ukrainian army intercepted dozens of Russian cruise missiles, they passed enough to inflict significant damage after Russia's recent missile attacks. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky once again asked the West to support his country with air defense. The Ukrainian army will receive MiM-104 Patriot air defense systems from the USA and Germany, but it will take some time before the weapons systems are delivered to a Ukraine that desperately needs protection from Russian air attacks. In addition, Russia has been forced to leave many areas captured by a successful Ukrainian counterattack in recent months. The Kremlin is poised to take decisive strategic action over the next 6 months, possibly with a view to regaining the initiative and ending Ukraine's current operational successes. We think that the Russian military command is making serious preparations for an expanded mobilization effort, saving mobilized personnel for future use while trying to increase military industrial production and reorganize the command structure. The war between Ukraine and Russia continues to reshape the relations between the world's giant countries with its overseas effects. The USA, one of Ukraine's most important allies, has begun to be seriously concerned about the threats of Russia's secret support. China's around the Pacific and Taiwan, especially in recent days. The tension between China and Taiwan deepens regional and global security concerns. The waters are warming in the Pacific, and elbow contact is beginning to occur between the US, Chinese, Russian, Japanese, and Taiwanese navies. Let's examine the situation and position of the US 7th Fleet in the Pacific, its security measures, and flexing its muscles against the Russian and Chinese navies with the hottest development. The political disagreements between China and Taiwan for years increased tensions in the Asia-Pacific region, while also warming the waters in the South China Sea. While there is a Russian threat that the US has to deal with on the territory of Ukraine, China's approach to Taiwan by threatening world peace across the ocean is tiring Washington a lot. But despite all this, the American Army deployed the Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Milius, belonging to the 7th Fleet in the Asia-Pacific to the South China Sea. The spokesperson for the U.S. 7th Fleet Command said in a statement that in accordance with international law, they have navigation rights in the South China Sea near the Spratly Islands. At the end of the operation, USS Milius left the aforementioned area and continued her other missions in the South China Sea. This created a complete political tsunami effect in the ocean during Beijing's recent dangerous steps around the island of Taiwan. The passage of a U.S. warship through the South China Sea caused China to perform joint jet flights in the region and organize Navy frigate expeditions. In other words, the Chinese Army took action against the approach of the U.S. Navy force to the South China Sea. The tension reached its peak due to the exercises carried out by China. However, with the intervention of the USA, the balances in the seas completely changed, and Taiwan's anxiety decreased a bit as China completes its own exercises in which it deploys warplanes and an aircraft carrier around Taiwan. The US sent a naval destroyer over the South China Sea as part of its Freedom of Navigation mission. When the U.S. Navy forces sent the USS Milius to cross the Spratly Islands, which Beijing claimed the activity in the seas reached its peak when the USS Milius began to advance on this critical route. News like a bomb fell on the agenda. The United States and the Philippines have announced that they have started their largest ever exercises after the Chinese exercises. Washington has announced that its annual Balikatan exercise with the Philippines is its largest ever, involving more than 17,000 troops, 12,000 of them from the United States. A dozen countries in the region will also participate in the exercises, which will continue until April 26. Australia sent a total of 100 soldiers for these exercises. The U.S. exercises had already been planned. The two-week Operation Balikatan also includes missions for armies to blow up a mock warship target in the South China Sea. This is a move that might attract China's attention. The focus of the exercises has evolved in recent years to reflect the shift in geosecurity concerns in the region. In addition, the fact that the USA and the Philippines began these joint military operations only 3 days after the completion of China's exercises in Taiwan was quite remarkable and was the most important example of increasing concerns. In other words, this move by the USA is an immediate response to the threat that China is trying to create. However, American and Filipino military officials have declared that the exercises should not be viewed as a response to the developments in Taiwan. Filipino and U.S. officials argue that these exercises demonstrate their commitment to open and free peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region. These explanations are logical steps to reduce tensions at sea. Alongside these steps, Washington signed a new defense agreement with Manila, under which 4 new naval bases will be established on the Philippine Islands near disputed waters. 3 of these bases are located north of Luzon Island, which is the closest land mass to Taiwan, as well as China waterways around the Philippines and in the South China Sea harbor, some of the world's most valuable trade routes, and have been the subject of disputed land claims by China in recent years. The U.S. establishing a naval base in these critical areas is considered a striking step against China's threats to Taiwan and its surroundings. In fact, this situation angered Beijing. China has also warned that U.S.-Philippines military cooperation should not interfere with disputes in heated waters. In addition, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin made striking statements about the U.S. establishing a naval base. However, this step by the USA was a solution to the tension between China and Taiwan, because after China completed its exercises in Beijing, Taiwan's defense ministry announced that it would continue to strengthen its preparation for war. President Tsai also stated that he has the right to represent his island on the world stage. Tsai denounced China's military response to the U.S. breakouts as irresponsible acts of a regional power. In fact, China's rapid military expansion and claiming territory in the disputed South China Sea, particularly several Filipino islands, sparked a wider backlash. On the other hand, the role of the Philippines in security in the region has increased. Many military sources and experts believe that increased U.S. access to Philippine bases could provide launch pads for combat operations in the event of gunfights over flashpoints such as Taiwan or the South China Sea. But Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos reiterated that the United States will not have access to military areas for offensive moves in this regard. The USA turned to different solutions. Instead of the bases where a large number of soldiers would be deployed, the U.S. administration is seeking access to location where light and flexible operations can be conducted involving supplies and surveillance in this critical area. Marcos has taken a very clear stance on this issue. However, the striking step of the USA on this issue was in the opposite direction of all predictions, because Washington recently gained access to 4 more military bases in the Philippines. This has helped the U.S. fill the void in the arc of alliances stretching from South Korea and Japan in the north to Australia in the south. One of the bases now available to the U.S. was to Taiwan, the second to the Scarborough Heard, and the third to the Spratly Islands. US troops will come to these base areas in small groups and in rotation. The U.S. goal will be to deter further China's regional expansion in the South China Sea. Washington will also seek to provide a place for its military to monitor China's military movements around Taiwan. With growing concerns about a clash over Taiwan, the Philippines could offer a backdrop for U.S. military operations or even a place to evacuate refugees. While these critical relations between the USA, Philippines, and China continue, Russia's Pacific Fleet Press Service reported that warships of the Russian Pacific Fleet are conducting anti-submarine exercises in the waters of the far east coast of the country. The exercises involved 3 corvette warships tasked with finding and destroying a mock enemy submarine in the Sea of Japan, also known as the East Sea, with the help of helicopters. Before the corvettes set sail, the siren sounded on board, encouraging the crew to take emergency measures to prepare the ships for battle and to exercise. The squadron also participated in other anti-aircraft and anti-submarine defense exercises. The final phase of the exercises included ship-based anti-sabotage support units with practical anti-sabotage grenade launchers. Additionally, these exercises were the second exercise in less than 3 weeks that the Russian Navy carried out in the same waters. But the most important thing was that after the US and Philippines exercised against China, Russia also joined this tension. The Russians actually carried out operations similar to the joint exercises of the USA and the Philippines. The exercise is thought to be supportive of China, even though Japan and Russia are also embroiled in a decades-long territorial dispute. But Japan lays claim to the Russian-held southern Kuril Islands, which Tokyo calls the Northern Territories. Russia, on the other hand, completely opposes it. In short, the tension is no longer on land but in the seas. Together, we will see more clearly what will happen in the coming days in Asia-Pacific.